Are your views at odds with the Republican Party?
Not at all. Actually, being conservative and being gay are not mutually exclusive.
The Bible tells us that male and female together carries the image of God.
We're talking about inalienable rights here. It is not just a part of the preamble, but is also a conservative tenet. Individual liberty, individual responsibility.
If you're trying to conserve the heritage of Western civilization insofar as it's consistent with Scripture and only insofar as it's consistent with Scripture, then you're a different kind of conservative. That's a Christian conservative.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's debate. Do gay rights conflict with conservative Christian values? My name is Danny Ryan, and I'm your student host. I'm a senior here at the University of Idaho studying microbiology and philosophy. This debate is hosted by CRF, that is Collegiate Reformed Fellowship. We are a Christian, church-based student organization committed to living out the Christian faith throughout our college years. We have a weekly meeting that is open to the public on Monday nights, 7:30 in the Commons Whitewater Room. You are all invited to that meeting to learn what it means to know God through His Son, Jesus Christ. Let me explain the details of this event. The format of the debate is as follows. Each speaker will make a 20-minute opening statement, followed by a 5-minute response. Next, each speaker will cross-examine the other for 15 minutes. Then the speakers will be allowed a 10-minute rebuttal and 5 minutes for closing remarks. Next, we have half an hour for questions from the audience. The mic is open. Please be thinking of your questions throughout the debate. On feedback, we want to hear from the audience. On your seat is a card. We want to hear about your interests in the debate and your interests in CRF. Please fill in that card, and on your way out, place it on into one of the boxes by the doors. Now I'd like to introduce your official moderator, Gabriel Wrench. Gabe finished his degree from the University of Idaho in 2005 and is currently finishing up his studies at Greyfriars Hall, a pastoral training ministry of Christ Church. He works at an economic modeling company here in Moscow, and along with his wife Annie, Gabe is the parent of 2 little girls. Tonight, Gabe will introduce our speakers and keep this discussion, hopefully, under control. Let's welcome our moderator, Gabriel Wrench.
Thank you, Danny. Well, welcome, and thank you for attending this important debate. I have a couple housekeeping rules to cover before this party gets started. First, the topic of this debate, do gay rights conflict with conservative Christian values, is a hot-button issue. And because of that, we can point to people and leaders on both sides of this issue who have not handled this debate well in the public square. At the same time, the general public has also not responded well at times. So both the communicators and the crowds, the listeners, have played a role in adding to the challenges of sorting through this topic. So tonight, both the debaters and you, the audience, play an important role in this discussion. Both parties have responsibility, the debaters and the audience, to interact and respond in a way that adds to this discussion. I trust you all are coming here tonight because you have some sort of vested interest in this topic. So, as the audience, you have 2 roles. Your first role here tonight is to be charitable, respectful, laugh when you find humor in our speakers, disagree without interrupting, and so on. Let all your responses show our debaters respect, and in doing this, everyone should have a good time tonight. If there are any interruptions, we will have you gently escorted out of the ballroom. I got 2 large fellows over here. So the event can continue in an orderly fashion. At the closing of the debate, we will have time for Q&A. This will be your time to shine and ask questions, which I'm sure you'll wow your friends and stump our speakers. Now, I've already admonished Doug and Clarke, no hitting below the belt. In fact, I told Clarke no pulling Doug's hair for obvious reasons. Clarke's got advantage there.
Or disadvantage.
That's my one joke for tonight. Secondly, and just as important as your first role, you came here to hear arguments for and against gay rights. This means, as a listener, you are the jury. So the jury's job is to sort through the arguments, Are they true? Are they false? Receive the arguments in your mind and in your heart. Don't come here tonight just to be entertained, or don't show up and walk away unaffected. Show up and participate, engage, think, absorb, disagree, and walk away with conclusive thoughts in your mind about this topic. How we sort through this, how we sort through these rights, gay rights, sexuality, and Christianity will inevitably impact our future decisions, our current and future decisions as individuals and as a collective society. Think about it for a moment. If you believe that marriage is solely between a man and a woman, and certain ramifications flow from that, certain cultural expectations result from that belief. And in the same way, if you believe that gay rights or gays have the right to marry, then certain ramifications follow that line of thought. Ideas have consequences. So listen, engage, think, disagree, but whatever you do, don't leave here tonight and not act. Don't leave here unaffected. This is why you are here. You want to hear a lively discussion, so let that discussion change you and develop you as a student here at University of Idaho. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the debate, and I look forward to your thoughtful questions following the debate. Now, as moderator, I have the privilege to introduce our speakers tonight. The first speaker I'll introduce is Pastor Doug Wilson. Douglas Wilson is the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. He's a founding board member of Logos School, a senior fellow of theology at New St. Andrews College. He serves as an instructor at Greyfriars Hall, a ministerial training program at Christ Church. He helped to establish the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, is the editor of Credenda Agenda, and the author of numerous books on classical Christian education, the family, the church, and Reformed faith. After serving in the U.S. Navy in a submarine service, he completed his BA, an MA in philosophy, and a BA in classical studies from the University of Idaho. Douglas and his wife Nancy have 3 children and a bunch of grandkids. Please welcome Douglas Wilson. Our first speaker tonight, who will be starting with his opening statement, R. Clarke Cooper, Executive Director of Log Cabin Republicans. Clarke Cooper, an Eagle Scout, an Army combat veteran and former diplomat, was elected Executive Director of the Log Cabin Republicans in 2010. Log Cabin Republicans promotes legislation to provide basic fairness for gay and lesbian Americans and works to build a more inclusive Republican Party. The 30-year-old conservative organization has state and local chapters nationwide, a full-time office in Washington, D.C., a federal political action committee, and state political action committees. Cooper served both terms of the George W. Bush administration. His last appointment was as counselor of the United States mission to the United States nations and for UN management and reform, where he advocated for transparency, accountability, and reform of the UN. He concurrently served as an alternative representative to the UN Security Council and as a delegate to the UN Fifth Committee from 2008-2009. He initially served as U.S. UN Chief of Staff in 2007. From 2006 to 2007, he was the Senior Legislative Advisor for the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, Office of Iraqi Affairs. A lot of big words here for Clarke. Overseas, Cooper served as the Legislative Affairs Advisor for the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad from 2005 to 2006. Early in 2005, he served as Policy Advisor to the Iraqi Ministry of Interior. Cooper initially came to Iraq as an Army Reserve officer in 2004 on active duty with Combined Joint Task Force 7 and later Multinational Force Iraq. For his Iraq tour of duty, Cooper was awarded the Joint Service Commendation Medal. He also received the Combat Action Badge, the Iraqi Campaign Medal with 2 stars, and Joint Meritorious Unit Award from the U.S. Department of Defense. Cooper entered the Bush administration in 2001 when he was appointed Assistant Director of the National Park Service for Legislative and Congressional Affairs. Between 1999 and 2001, Cooper was Deputy Director of Florida Governor Jeb Bush Federal Affairs Office in Washington. He also served as the Director of Governmental Affairs for the McCuskey Tribe of Florida from 1995 to 99. From 1994 to 95, Cooper was on the legislative staff for U.S. Representatives Elena Rose Lieutenant. Cooper was raised in Tallahassee, Florida, where in his youth he attained the rank of Eagle Scout. He's the graduate of the Florida State University and is also the graduate of the U.S. Army Infantry Airborne School at Fort Benning, Georgia, and the U.S. Army Intelligence School at Fort
Huachuca.
Arizona.
Another Indian name.
You're killing me here, man. You're embarrassing me up here.
American Indian name.
I got to moderate this whole thing? Cooper resides in Washington, D.C., where he is an Army Reserve officer, serves on the Republican National Committee Finance Committee, and is an at-large member of the District of Columbia Republican Committee. He is also a member of the St. Paul Episcopalian Parish, Venerable Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Pilgrims of the United States, Army and Navy Club, Reserves Officers Association, Veterans of Foreign Affairs, National Rifle Association, and Young Republicans. Please welcome Clarke Cooper. Clarke, you have 20 minutes for opening statement.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here at University of Idaho. Thank you very much, Danny Ryan, the Collegiate Reformed Christ Church hosting us tonight, especially Gabe Wrench for putting this all together. I know what it's like to put on these events and the invitation to visit with you all. Also honored to join Pastor Doug Wilson for this important dialogue amongst fellow Christians, or at least I'm presuming that most of us are, so I'm going to go with that. As fellow conservatives that are here and fellow Christians, we have a responsibility to share the Word of God outside of the walls or the comfort of our homes and our church. And we share that responsibility in making sure that His never-ending love is known to those who have yet to see the light or have to share that love. One's sexual orientation, however, does not guarantee, nor does it preclude someone from receiving the Word of God or being able to receive the Word of God. And it doesn't preclude or guarantee if they are going to be able to have that personal relationship with Christ. One's orientation also does not predetermine one's life or their lifestyle. So while one's orientation is not a choice, how we choose to live our lives, how we choose to execute our lives is very much a choice. I share that as an entree because I also am going to talk to you about, in the case for why equality measures, or as some call it, gay rights, is the right thing to do. It is also the conservative thing to do. It's the Christian thing to do. I want to share with you what it is that I do to help advance that within the conservative community, my community. Log Cabin Republicans, we're one of many ancillary groups. You heard Gabe mention the RNC, the Republican National Committee. That's the big mothership. You have college Republicans, which you have here on campus. Young Republicans, we're a part of that fulcrum, that body. And we've been around for several decades. It is my job, it's Log Cabin's job, to work within the conservative community to show that inclusion does win not only pragmatically for election results, but it's the right thing to do as conservatives, as Americans. So while at the same time we're advancing the party's main line on efforts like tax reform, reducing the size of government, advocating for private retirement accounts, and pushing for a balanced budget amendment, these are things that we can do at the same time as we're also standing up for equality for all. So again, as I said, akin to these other ancillary groups like the CRs and the YRs, we're based throughout the country. It's important for us to remain active and viable throughout the country. I would like to let you know that you can go to our website, www.logcabin.org. There's a lot of resources there as to why we exist, why we have a role, why it's incumbent upon us to be around. And in that vital role, I'll share with you that the party itself is recognizing that there is a need for inclusion and unity around core conservative values that we all share. Because someone happens to be gay or lesbian does not opt them out of sharing those values or practicing those values. And then you look at the core bookends or tenets, some people call, of individual liberty and individual responsibility. We talk about our responsibility in our faith that we have to not only maintain those values, but it's our responsibility to bear witness as well. Individual responsibility in a government context is not being dependent upon the state. The RNC and Chairman Priebus recognize that role that we play, especially today. Maybe not so much in the past, but more so now. And there are expectations that Log Cabin Republicans, like our peers, remain fully engaged and provide that sweat equity in the messaging, in this debate, this broader, much bigger debate, not just marriage, but the larger debate writ large, in addition to winning elections, not just winning elections. At the same time, while there's a support for conservative movement writ large, and I recognize that the Republican Party is just a piece of a pie, you got a much broader movement. The reason why there's been an upswing, we're still having to manage where that growth can take place and how we can do that. And there's a recognition of that growth is because many voters, many of Americans, have become disillusioned with what's been sold to them by liberals, usually Democrats, and then that their policies for mandated health care, increasingly high debt, continuous bailouts for special interests, and very real and serious incursions upon religious liberty. Those things have driven a number of voters to actually rethink where they are on the spectrum. And we saw in 2010, election results confirmed what politicos or beltway bandits like myself have known, that many swing voters who gave Democrats their victories in 2006 and 2008 have actually swung back, either self-identified as a conservative independent, a conservative Republican, or a libertarian, but essentially swinging back into our camp. And the same can be made amongst gay voters, believe it or not. This is where you probably need to make sure security is backing off some of the folks who are going to challenge this. But of course, I'm in Idaho. I'm not in Berkeley, where I would be. The stage would be stormed at this point. In 2008, 28% of the gay voter, the LGBT voter, voted for McCain over Obama. And that's significant in the sense that, you know, there's this perception that if one is gay, then you vote liberal. If one's gay, you're polyamorous. If one's gay, you don't support family values, or you don't practice those yourself. Or if you're gay, you're agnostic or atheist. Truth is, that's not the case. And we see that not only in faith, but we also see that in politics and policy. I mentioned that statistic in 2008 because guess what, folks? In 2010, during the midterm elections, that number went up. So we went from 28% of the gay vote voted Republican in 2008. That jumped up to 31% in 2010. And there are a lot of theories as to why. I know that some of the data that we have anecdotally, either through our members or people within the party writ large, is that because if you happen to be gay and you happen to be a Christian, you recognize that what's being sold by the other side of the aisle doesn't jive with or doesn't comport with your core, your foundation, your core values. And it also, let's look at there's the pocketbook issues as well. The general electorate support, however, for us, the Republican Party, will not last long term if there seems to be or continues to be an anti-gay stream or a mean-spirited agenda opposed upon, or what's perceived as an exclusionary agenda upon us. And I'm saying in a divisive platform or divisive agenda. Politics is about addition. It's about numbers. So when you get past the issues to actually get those issues advanced, it is about numbers. You want more, right? So Republicans and candidates and office holders need to maintain relevance with the general populace to win elections. The party of Abraham Lincoln should be the leader in the fight for equality, not stand in the way or be perceived either directly or indirectly as an impediment or avoiding equality. Current Mississippi Governor, Haley Barbour, I don't know if you all know him, love that guy, former chairman of the party, very much understands the need to look at building coalitions, understands the value of inclusion, said last year at a leadership conference, he said, you know, purity is the enemy of victory, in the sense that if we identify a absolutist position in a political party and not recognize variants of faith, variants of people's creed, what have you, we're in danger of shrinkage. So not having that addition. And Haley was right about those observations as far as those trends are reflected with a generational shift within the Republican Party. We're here on a campus. I go to college campuses on a regular basis at the invitation of the CRs. I was a college Republican, and going to a CR chapter, I'm not surprised to find that, in 2009, that was only 3 years ago, the CRNC, College Republican National Committee, removed any language that they had in their white papers, their policy position papers that said anything negative about gay persons, the LGBT community, or anything associated, say, with the marriage issue, which has been raised. Just down the road, in Washington State, Chairman Wilbur they're currently reviewing their party platform documents. Last year, Chairman Ailey, not too far away over in Oregon, removed all language from their party platform that was either directly anti-gay or perceived as anti-gay on the premise that the government, so again, I got my 10-minute card here. The government doesn't have a role in one's private life. Now, as a member of a church, I would agree with that. As a conservative, I don't go to the government to seek my spiritual counsel. I go to my parish for that. I don't want Uncle Sam to be my spiritual counsel there. So I'll fast forward a little bit through this. But as I said, we're talking about this generational shift that's recognized not only in the party, this is also within the faith community, within the broader Christian community. It is the younger conservative that understands that one's orientation does not rule them out as a corporate member in the community. And as fellow conservatives, as fellow Christians, one's belief or one's ability to succeed or fail should not be impeded upon by the government. The government should not be a barrier to one's success or failure. I mean, it is our God-given right to be able to take advantage of the fact that we do live in a free society, that we have the ability to succeed on merits and capabilities. So statutes or laws that preclude the merit of a citizen's capability or create a stratified system of benefits and services are government roadblocks to liberty. They're also government roadblocks to prosperity. And last autumn, my organization celebrated the failed and unconstitutional policy of don't ask, don't tell, because anyone who's willing to fight and is able to fight for our country, defend the Constitution and those constitutional rights that we all enjoy, they should be able to serve without the specter of discharge due to their sexual orientation. And we were able to succeed because of the courageous leadership of a number of Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate. In fact, it was a Republican that drafted the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I know the Democrats like to take credit for this, but it was just put on the president's desk to sign. He didn't really do anything. That was a Republican drafted bill in the Senate that finally got to him. And there are other issues out there that we may not have time to discuss today, but I want to paint a picture for you that marriage isn't the only thing out there. It isn't the number one issue for a number of LGBT Americans. It's important for those that want to have those legal protections for themselves and their families, but there are other issues out there, like being able to serve in the military, like having employment non-discrimination in the workplace. God forbid somebody is fired just because it's found out that they happen to be gay. That's still legal in this country. There's tax incursions, or people pay extra. It actually is expensive to be gay, believe it or not. I mean, if you are a same-sex couple, it's as if you are two strangers. You're not recognized before the state. Never mind marriage. Tax code doesn't recognize that. So there are those issues that are outlying. So again, working forward and advancing with leaders who act with courage in their convictions. We believe in basic fairness. And as former Vice President Dick Cheney famously said, freedom means freedom for everyone. And when he said that, that was a direct reference to the LGBT community. I mean, obviously you may know about his wonderful daughter Mary and his daughter-in-law Heather, and they have a beautiful family. In fact, those kids start school next week. But he's right. Freedom means freedom for everyone, not just some, but everyone. And I'm tightening this up because I know that I'm about to get another card. Sorry. See, Danny, this is what happens when you get a liberal arts degree and you write. Yeah, he was asking about degrees. So when it comes to conservative family values for all families, again, not some, but all families, gay or straight, we're all united in the belief that strong families are critical to a free society. I don't think anybody would argue that except the most socialist of socialists who think that the state is the answer. We recognize that, though, that government's respect of marriage, because of its vital role in fostering greater liberty and greater independence, thereby lessening the dependence on the state, is important. Unfortunately, this principle is undermined by the exclusion of same-sex couples from legal recognition as devoted parents and committed, loving, monogamous partners. Log cabin Republicans are committed to advocating for legislation to strengthen American families. I personally strive to secure the freedom to marry as a Christian, not just as a Republican, not just as a partisan, not just as an advocate, because I do believe in family values. I benefited from a strong family household with a mother and a father and siblings who cared and loved for me. I am here today because of that. Those who are not blessed to have a strong, loving family with parents, be it mom and dad, dad and dad, or mom and mom, have a bigger struggle or bigger challenge. We know this. This is proven. There's data for that. So again, strive for the freedom to marry as a Christian and for family values as a conservative, not in spite of it. Log Cabin's work is about equality, but it's also about a commitment. In an ironic twist, gay and lesbian Americans are among the strongest promoters of conservative family values today, believe it or not, because it's really hard. If you want to get married and you want to have a family, you got to go extra steps to do so. Fellow marriage equality advocates boldly speak for the importance of commitment and taking responsibility for each other in an era where cohabitation and divorce are very commonplace, right? People shacking up, not even checking with mom and dad, let alone checking with their own pastor. See this all the time. While too often fatherhood amounts to paying child support, gay couples are fighting hard for the ability to adopt children in need of homes. These are children who sometimes can't get placed anywhere. Where groups like NOM, the National Organization of Marriage, contend that marriage is about exclusively procreating sex, gay couples are reminding America that family means much more than that. Because not everybody, even a mom and dad, some people don't have the ability to procreate. But there is a need for care, for loving homes for children. So I close with the legislative reforms sought by LGBT Americans, including Log Cabin, are not intended to secure special rights or tear down social institutions. We seek only the ability to build lives together for richer or for poorer, without unjust taxation tilting the scale toward poverty, to care for our loved ones in sickness and in health, through equal access to health care. I'm not endorsing Obamacare, by the way. I'm working to repeal that, so private health care, and without suffering from a domestic partner penalty. That's that tax penalty I mentioned. And to be at our partner's side when death does part us, to be able to be there at the bedside in the hospital, without the fear that the absence of a marriage license could possibly turn grief into tragedy. The importance of marriage and family in American law derives not from the mere tradition or the honor rightly given to these institutions by various religions. As conservatives, we believe in the ties that bind us. The society is stronger when we make vows to each other. My ability to be able to reasonably be a contributing member of society and committing to raising a family with a spouse is not defined by my sexual orientation. And that is many members of the gay community believe. The prayer that I make in my church or at home, the pledge that I recite at my Masonic lodge, are not predicated by my orientation, by my sexual orientation. There's nothing about being gay that makes my prayer, my pledge, or even, God willing, one day, my marriage vow mean anything less. Thank you.
Thanks, Clarke. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Well, many thanks to the organizers. Thanks to all of you for coming out. Thank you to Mr. Cooper for his willingness to fly across the country for this event. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to engage in this debate on this crucial issue. Clarke began by affirming the love of God, and since this is a debate, I suppose I must rise to maintain the negative. All right, our topic is, do gay rights conflict with conservative Christian values? Now, virtually every word in our selected topic cries out for definition. And of course, they are all connected to one another. But the word that I would like to focus on is the word rights. What do we mean by that? Are we talking about freedom rights, as in the right to free speech or free assembly or gun ownership? There would be no debate there. If that's what we were talking about on rights, there would be no debate. I believe that the right to habeas corpus should apply as much to a homosexual as to me, and for exactly the same reasons. When someone says, do you believe in homosexual rights? I will say, of course. I believe they're the right to free assembly, the right to gun ownership, the right to all the rights that I expect for myself as an American citizen, I want homosexuals to have. Or are we talking about benefit rights, like the so-called right to affordable housing that the left would talk about? Or are we talking about non-discrimination rights? And who is it that may not discriminate? Would it be government agencies that may not discriminate, or do non-discrimination, the right to not be discriminated against, does that apply to private individuals and private businesses and so on? We'll get to that a little bit later. Lurking in the background of that question is the troublesome matter of the distinction between public and private. So we need to begin by asking for a definition of private lives. What do we mean by it? If marriage is part of my private life, if marriage is part of my personal life, then why did I make my vows in public? Why is my marriage registered at the county courthouse? Well, the answer is that marriages result in property and the combination of property, and when things go south, somebody in authority at the county courthouse has to sort out who owns what. It's a public event. Marriage is a public event, not a private event. So what do you mean private? Why would the government be involved in the disposition of a married couple's assets if all that was part of their private life? What are we talking about? If a man married to a man is private, and that is grounds for accepting it, then why isn't a man married to 3 women just as private? I say this while granting that Solomon's marital activity could probably be recognized as public under any set of definitions. 700 wives and 300 concubines is the size of a mid-sized Idaho town.
Larger.
So that's public. All right, that's public. So my opponent, Clarke, has said, Mr. Clarke Cooper, Clarke hereafter, has said that the true definition of conservatism is centered on individual, quote, individual liberty and not having the government involved in your personal life, close quote. So there it is again. What do we mean by personal life? Now, before using this next illustration, I want to ask you all to bear with me for about 30 seconds, because when I start the illustration, it's going to look like I'm saying one thing and I'm not saying that at all, so just cool your jets. A house burglar operating entirely alone under the cover of darkness makes off with your family silver. Is this part of his personal life? If you catch him, what would you think if a helpful neighbor told you that he didn't think you should prosecute, and that while he, the neighbor, personally was a deeply committed Catholic, his views on theft were his religious views straight out of the catechism, and that our country was founded on the separation of church and state? Would this schizo neighbor even slow you down? Well, no. Would you even stop to argue with him? Well, again, no. And the issue is not what I'm comparing homosexuality to, but rather the argument against. I'm talking about personal rights, private views, church and state. When we oppose something like theft, or when we oppose something like homosexual marriage, What are we appealing to? Is that a personal conviction, or is that something else? David Lampo of the Cato Institute, in his book, The Fundamental Freedom, tries to convince us that conservatives, Republicans, and libertarians should rally round in support of gay rights, similar to Clarke's argument here tonight. Unfortunately, in order to make this case, he doesn't advance a new argument, but rather doubles down on an old confusion about the wall of separation between church and state. So this is not really an advance in our public discourse, because we've been muddled on the question of the relationship of church and state down to the present. So Lampo's central confusion is this. It's his inability to articulate why the heck we should do anything. He says, quote, "To insert one's personal religious beliefs into our laws is to abandon the highest political value of this country, which is individual liberty." Now, there's a lot, actually, listening to Clarke's talk, there's quite a bit of it I agreed with, every third word or so. I was piecing together, we're working from here. So I don't want to speak against individual liberty at all. I believe we're living in a time when individual liberty, real liberty, is imperiled, and I believe the overweening state is a very grave threat. So I don't want to stand up and sound like I'm in any way arguing against individual liberty. Yay, individual liberty. But if we don't want to put personal religious beliefs into the public square, we have to define what is a personal religious belief. Is there any other kind? Or are all religious beliefs personal? Or is this in contrast to public religious beliefs? Is a personal religious belief a particular conviction about the number of sacraments? For example, a Roman Catholic would say there's 7 sacraments, and a classical Protestant would say there's 2 sacraments. Is that what we mean by personal religious differences or personal religious belief? And then, would a public religious belief be something like belief in the dignity of every human individual because he's created in the image of God? Like when the founders said that we were endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. But isn't that a personal religious belief, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights? And individual liberty. Liberty to do what? By what standard? Once homosexual marriage is accepted, once homosexuals are marrying and being given in marriage in all 50 states, après-moi le déluge, do you think that perhaps the polygamists will approach us with the demand to be able to exercise their individual liberty? If you think, as I do, that this will most certainly happen, please tell me why they should not be able to exercise their individual liberty, the very highest value in our political system, in this way. Now, please note the structure of this argument. I am not saying that Clarke is arguing for polygamy. All right? I'm not saying that. What I'm interested in is finding out what his arguments could possibly be against it. So I'm not saying that he is arguing for polygamy. I'm saying what if we open the door to gay rights based on individual liberty and not letting personal religious convictions into the public square, well, all of a sudden I discover that I don't have anything to say when someone wants to establish Sharia law and wants to have up to 4 laws, because 4 wives, up to 4 laws. we all wish we could get back to never. So isn't the belief that marriage consists of 2, no more, no less, isn't that a personal religious belief? Some religious beliefs say 5, up to 5. Some religious beliefs go beyond 5 total. Isn't that a personal religious belief? And why should we restrict someone's liberty? Aren't there competing religions and belief systems that let the number go higher? Now, it will not do to scoff and say that nobody is fighting for polygamy. I'm not saying that Clarke is. I'm not saying that anybody is. I've not seen anybody in the public square demonstrating for polygamy. I am saying that the argument that we're being presented with now on homosexual marriage wants us to open the door to homosexuals, and it wants us to open the door to homosexuals for certain specified reasons. Those reasons are the ones that are being advanced currently, and they apply to more people than just homosexuals. whether it's convenient to admit that or not. It could be a PR disaster if they say, oh, sure, come all. Well, yeah, I could see why the PR guy wouldn't want you to do that. But it's still, the argument still applies. If you leave the key under the mat at the front door, more people than just you can use it. If you leave the key under the mat and you say, this key goes to that door, you're not the only one who gets to use that key. If you want us to listen to the homosexuals, the gay rights lobby, and not to them, you have to tell us why. And you have to tell us why without appealing to personal religious beliefs, because that's the standard. You have to tell us why. At some point, somebody will say, where are we going and why am I in this handbasket? Why is this going in this direction? How did we get here, right? How did we get here? So this is the issue. We have to answer these questions. Are not polygamists individuals? And Clarke referred a number of times, there's the GLBT community, but notice with bisexuals, in order for a bisexual to have marital status for his sexuality, that requires a minimum of 3. Right? You have to have a minimum of 3 people in order to have marriage for a bisexual. A bisexual, in order to express himself, has to be able to be married to a man and a woman, if he's a man, and so on. So where does this magic, tenacious adherence to 2 come from? And last, why should our highest political value be individual liberty? We have to answer the question and do so without reference to any personal religious opinions or opinions derived from somebody else's personal religious opinions. There are political systems out there which do not value individual liberty as the highest political value. Obama, Pelosi, and Reid come to mind. So why? Little joke, all right. I wish it were funny. Why are they wrong? If they don't value, if they're not libertarians, and they say that man, if President Obama's "you didn't build that" speech that blew up on him, some people think that man collective is senior to man individual. So why is that wrong? If they win another couple of elections, will individual liberty no longer be our highest political value? When that happens, should we just roll over? I referred earlier to different definitions of rights. The first kind of right is a liberty right, the right to be left alone in certain specified areas. These are rights that we have over against an officious government or a meddling neighbor. I have, for example, the right to keep and bear arms. This right was given to me by God, not James Madison. I also have a right to free speech. I have a right to free assembly, together with others exercising that same right. I have a right to worship God as He requires in His Word. Now, in this sense, I absolutely, as I said earlier, I absolutely believe in gay rights. Homosexuals are people, and habeas corpus applies as much to them as anybody else. They and we have a right to a fair and speedy trial. They have a right not to be convicted of a crime on the basis of stupid rumors. So I can't think of a single genuine right that I have that homosexuals do not have together with me. Now, at this point in the proceedings, someone clears his throat and says, "What? Marriage, you're married, right? You have a right to marry," and they do not. But marry is not an unspecific verb with no direct object. I have a right not to marry generically. I had a right and exercised the right to marry a woman. And they have the same right. They can marry a woman too. A man and a woman together is what marriage is. A man and a woman together is what marriage is. I'm going to refer to that later. The fact that they don't want to marry a woman is their lookout. I have a right to own a gun, and so does your spinster Quaker aunt. The fact that she doesn't want to own a gun is perfectly acceptable. She doesn't have to own a gun. But what she's not free to do is redefine everything and say that gun ownership is very important to her, but that for her, gun ownership means owning a quilting rack. Marriage was defined by God. Marriage was defined by God in the garden, and He wove it right into our identity as having been created in the image of God. In Genesis 1:27, we were created in the image of God, male and female created He them. Not only did He weave this definition in, He did it with a thread count that we cannot even begin to count or comprehend. Redefining marriage is therefore not a project of weaving something else. It is the destructive project of tearing up what was already woven. But there's more. Liberty rights mean that other entities, like the government or your meddlesome neighbor, have a corresponding duty to respect that right. They respect it by leaving you alone. You buy a gun, they do not attempt to take that gun away from you. They respect your rights by doing nothing. All they have to be is not a busybody. In this sense, such rights are negative rights. But the other conception of rights, the benefit rights or the non-discrimination rights, are a little bit different. The affordable housing or the living wage. With the gun, you buy the gun and other people leave you be. With the affordable housing, you provide the lack of a house and somebody else has to buy you the house. You provide the need for a job and someone else has to pay the wage. Your rights understood in this way amount to an obligation on the part of someone else to provide it. So you have a right and they have a corresponding duty not to respect what you bought, but rather to buy you something. Your right is purchased with corresponding duties from them. The more freedom you have under this definition, the less somebody else has. So not everyone leaps to do their duties in this regard. Enter the government in order that we have somebody to make them do their duty. The government takes money from them in order to pay for the right to an affordable house, a living wage, or a hot lunch. So the notion of positive rights is therefore the intellectual framework of statists and slavers. The former idea, the idea of individual liberty rights, is the theological framework for a free society. With liberty rights, you pay for your own gun and other people leave you alone, depending on the gun. With the positive rights, under that definition, say you had the right to gun ownership. This would mean that somebody else would have to buy you a gun with a gun pointed at them in case they didn't want to. Now, what does this have to do with gay rights? All we have to do is ask whether or not anybody is going to be coerced in outlandish ways in order to establish, say, the right of homosexuals to marry. With negative rights, when a right is recognized and acknowledged, the experience of liberty grows for everyone. With positive rights, when a right is established, real liberty in all sorts of areas shrinks. So go back to the illustration of gun ownership. A man has a right to own a gun, and the owner of a restaurant has the right to require all guns to be checked at the door. It is his restaurant. Of course, he should also have the right to go the other way, too, and require you to wear a gun. This is Idaho, and we have at least one restaurant here in town that gives you a discount for open carry. It's kind of endearing. So, say that homosexuals are given the right to marry, as has occurred in a number of states. Do Christian photographers, conservative Christian photographers who object to gay marriage, do they have a right to turn down the job of shooting the wedding? Do Christian caterers get to say, no thank you, we don't do gay weddings? Do the Christian owners of a bed and breakfast have the right to decline being the scene of the honeymoon? No? Well then, there's your answer. Those driving this particular agenda are no friends of liberty, or at least they need to do a lot of spade work and a lot of definition on what rights are before we go any further. There have already been court cases in states that allow gay marriage where a Christian photographer didn't feel comfortable doing a wedding and gets sued. All right? Did liberty really increase? And lost the suit. I think it was in Arizona. So this leads up to the questions that I want to pose later on in our interaction. I know and accept that there are sexual anarchists out there who want way more than you're arguing for, who are demanding far more. But when it's your turn to say no to them, what standard will you appeal to and why? All right, what standard will you appeal to when you join together with me in opposing their demand? Another thing is that I want to ask, or I want to get on the table, and I hope that it's been clear in my argumentation here, that I want to pose the question of whether you believe that there are morally serious opponents of homosexual marriage. Are there morally serious, responsible people who are being morally serious at the point of this issue who are opposing homosexual marriage? Or is it a species of hate? In the public discourse, in the public fighting about this, much of what I've said, if we were in Berkeley, would be rejected as hate speech. right? Is it really? Is there a morally serious case to be made against homosexual rights? Thank you.
Now we move to a response to the opening statement. Clarke, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Doug, I'm glad we got it out there that we both are against polygamy. That was hanging over the crowd earlier tonight. And we also agree that we are created in the image of God. And this goes back to where advocates and proponents for equality measures argue, not just the marriage issue, it's the ability to, again, not get fired from your place of employment because your boss finds out that you're gay, you're doing a great job, but he or she doesn't like it, off you go. So it isn't a matter of imposition upon others. I do think there's a fair point to be made about that if a private business owner doesn't want to provide goods or services, there's some discussion that can be made there. But when you look at the basic protections, again, I talked about the risk that a couple runs today. If you happen to be, if I tried to get married today, in many jurisdictions, my partner would not be able to access me if I was in a car accident in a hospital. Some places, yes. Many places, no. Again, being able to get real estate, any kind of any settlement at the time of death, your partner doesn't have access to that. Anyone who gets married today, $25, $50 at the county courthouse, you get that immediate protection for your spouse. And a same-sex couple doesn't have that. If they're wealthy enough, and I'm not, but if they're wealthy enough, they'll go through the hoops of getting a trust executed. They'll sit down, they'll do a very expensive legal document. But guess what? Your average gay guy or your average lesbian is working a workaday wage person. They can't afford to go to some big attorney in New York or San Francisco and say, hey, knock out a trust document for me. But anybody can go down to the courthouse. And this goes back to David Lampo, happens to be full disclosure, and that was my departing gift for you. I got a copy of the book for you, Doug.
I'm halfway through it, I'm sorry.
It's called A Fundamental Freedom. David Lampo happens to be one of our members. He is at the Cato Institute. Cato Institute's a very libertarian organization, think tank in DC. And what David spent a whole book talking about, and I'm going to whittle down to a few minutes here, was that on the particular notion, the actual institution of marriage, how that became a state institution, it really wasn't originally in our country. I happen to be a member of a church that had its roots in the Church of England. And before we were free, before we had our own government, the UK, believe it or not, you'd be hard-pressed to find it, because many see it as a post-Christian society. It's technically a theocracy, right? The crown is the defender of the faith. Back in the colonial era, marriage was had sole jurisdiction by the Church of England. But guess what the government thought? We can make money off of this. It's a revenue maker. We can charge a tax for it. We can get money for it. We can execute this. But today, while you can go to a courthouse, marriage still can be denied by the church. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in the dialogue, is that a legal recognition at the courthouse does not mean that a parish priest or a pastor is forced to recognize that marriage. In fact, that applies now with heterosexual couples. Just because somebody can go to Viva Las Vegas doesn't mean when they get home to Schenectady that their pastor, their priest is going to recognize that marriage. They may be legally married, but that also, there's no state function that forces a church to do that. In fact, today, in jurisdictions where same-sex marriage is legal, like New York State, a church can deny that recognition. And there is no going to court. There is no recourse. So we have to remember, as we go forward in this debate, not here tonight, I'm talking about writ large in our country and amongst fellow Christians, is remember that look at there's a legal aspect to this. I'm not saying knock out the religious aspect, but be mindful of the data point that a courthouse status by no means guarantees for anybody, even people who are sitting here, doesn't mean that when they go before God or before their church, that the church will recognize it. My church publishes what's called bans of marriage 3 times. And 3 times our parish has the opportunity to say that couple shouldn't be married. The state doesn't have a role there, other than the state can issue a marriage certificate. So again, what we're looking at here is the role. There is a state function, and then there's a function of the church. And those 2 things, the state cannot tell the church what to do as far as recognition. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Clarke. You have 5 minutes.
I was expecting and was glad to hear that Clarke and I robustly equally reject polygamy. And we have dismissed the specter that was hovering over the ballroom. Again, this is Idaho, and we have, in parts of Idaho, there's a long LDS history, and was written into it was written into the Idaho State Constitution that no one could hold public office if they believed in celestial marriage. And that was in the Idaho Constitution, and it was a relic, and nobody paid any attention to. But there was a referendum to remove that just like 15 years ago or so. And the referendum passed and it was removed, but about a third of Idahoans voted against removing it. They wanted to keep that in there because when you look at the history of the world, polygamous marriages are not the figment of somebody's imagination. It is standard in the Middle East. It is accepted under Sharia law. Certain Western societies are being forced to deal with it at a welfare benefits level. And you have the same situations. This is what I meant by the key under the doormat. You have the same sorts of scenarios that you're describing that would apply equally to a polygamous marriage or a bisexual. Bisexuals, you talked about the hospital scene where a grief becomes a tragedy. Well, bisexuals die. Bisexuals get in car wrecks, and then his guy friend and his girlfriend both come, and now they're in the hospital. My interest here is not to get you to say, all right, down in my heart, I really want polygamous unions. I don't think that's what, I just am interested in what your argument would be against that. I know that there are people out there that want that. There are people who want polygamous unions. There are people who want open marriages. There are people who want marriages that are not limited to 2 people. The traditional Christian view of 1 man, 1 woman, 1 time, that view is common and accepted in our circles. And the broader society accepted it for a long time, and then when the Christian foundations eroded, that started to go too. At some point, the concept of 2 is also going to erode. It's also going to go. And since we agree that we need to keep it to 2, what are your arguments? What could you possibly say to a grieving bisexual? What could you possibly say to a man with 3 wives who's dying, and I'm sorry, you can only have one of them come in? What can you say to him? What argument would shut that down? And this is why, for me, it's a matter of, I'd go back to what was said earlier. You made a comment about mean-spirited opposition. I want to be as opposed as I possibly can be to the agenda that you're advancing, but I don't want it to be mean-spirited. I want it to be in the interests of truth, in the interests of what God expects of us, what God teaches. I want my opposition to this sort of thing to be merry, to be jolly, not surly, not antagonistic on a personal level, but principled, and that means you've got to follow the argument. If you're bisexual, that means you're a male and you're attracted to men and women, and the only way you can have a marital expression of that is if you have 3 people. And that means you've got to either stop saying GLBT, and you've got to drop the B, or you've got to say, okay, I'm open to more than 2. But I don't think you really are. And part of the reason is because once you let the monkeys out of the cage, you're going to have a terrible, terrible time, because surprise, it doesn't stop there. With the one other thing, I just want to say this as sort of an addendum and then be done here. I think a lot of the problems, and this is a place where I think that we would quite possibly agree, I believe that we've painted ourselves into the legal corner that we're in because of the state providing as many benefits as they do to heterosexual couples. If we had a just biblical society and we scaled back the taxation to the levels where it ought to be, and we weren't giving free chocolate milk to everybody, where we scaled it way back, then we wouldn't have as much to collide over, because you wouldn't have largesse from the government going to heterosexuals and then not to homosexuals. I think that the issue ought to be marriage simply, and not all the benefits, because I'm opposed to a bunch of those benefits for heterosexuals.
Thank you, Doug. We now move to a cross-examination. Each debater will have 15 minutes to ask questions and cross-examine one another. And again, Clarke Cooper has the starting grounds here. Thank you.
So we've already kind of started on the open questions, which in a way, these aren't just Clarke to Doug. This is actually an open question of how do we protect committed couples? How do we protect or recognize same-sex couples who are at the risk and are at a daily risk of endangerment or loss? Again, I talked to you about the emotional aspect of it, but there are some very real consequences there. So how do we do that? Because there is, part of the answer is, and this is a discussion that's happened amongst many gay conservatives, is, well, what about civil unions? And the answer that's come back by folks like Ted Olson, he was our Solicitor General. I started with him in the Bush administration. He's now one of the proponents for marriage. And his reason for being supportive of marriage equality before the law is, he said, unfortunately, we have over 200, for a young country, we have over 200 years of layer upon layer of local, municipal, county, state, federal. This goes back to Doug's point of, oh boy, look at what we've got here. Look at what all benefits and packages of things that are either directly or tertiarily associated with marital status. Why is that an issue in the courtroom and as well as in legislative bodies? Is that unfortunately, because of those layers, there is no tabula rasa. If we could start over fresh, I think many would argue that something that would be defined as a civil union, what some countries just say, we're just going to call it that, call it a day, would work. Unfortunately, it's not enough. It's less than. It's subpar. And we've seen cases of this in jurisdictions. Illinois is a perfect example where trying to do the right thing, the legislature passed civil unions. Well, now there's huge tax issues between the state and the federal government with couples. And mind you, civil unions isn't just for gay people. This is for heterosexuals as well. But where you had couples who filed under civil union status not recognized by the IRS. So again, going back to what we already have, and as somebody who's a big advocate for a balanced budget amendment and reducing the size of government, I would like for us to be at tabula rasa, but we have advanced several hundred years where we now have these layers of governance that we are burdened with. And the simple answer to that is making it clear across the board that marital status in the courthouse before the law is what makes it equitable. Now that said, I go back to the earlier point of, it certainly doesn't mean that the state can tell a church what to do. This goes back to the religious freedom. And that is something that is certainly, I don't think anybody has sought to challenge. Doug made a very good point about the arguments of, well, what if? Well, I can tell you, I'm not aware of any bills that have been sponsored anywhere by any member of Congress on either side of the aisle arguing for anything like a civil status for something other than two people. theoretically, is that something that could happen? Sure, but there's no precedent for that. There's no legal precedent for that in a solid sense, not only in current court cases, but what's happening in the legislative side as well. So when you look at the legislative track and the judicial track, what we're faced with is several hundred years of layers upon multiple tax code, statute that impact what it means to be married by law. Again, not before God, but by law. What does that mean? You get some or less depending where you're at. And what's the impact of things like open service? The Department of Defense right now has found itself in a real pickle because of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, where they'll say, okay, we have open service now, and Captain Cooper, by the way, we don't care, as long as you can shoot straight and you can do your mission, great. Okay, that's cool. But if and when I do get married, my spouse won't have access to anything that my buddy's spouse would have. I was just in a wedding a year ago. I was the best man with another captain, and as soon as Pep married Aaron and Aaron became the missus, she got full access to his DOD benefits. Even though I can walk into my colonel's office tomorrow and say, I met the coolest guy ever, he's the one for me, we're equally yoked, mom likes him, my stepdad likes him, all that stuff, no access to benefits. And this is where the issue is again, it's the avoiding those disasters, not just so much an emotional thing, which is important, but there is a practical application here as well. And also remembering, as I said, Ted Olson said it best, if we could start at ground zero, if we could start different, but we can't. We've got several hundred years in this country of law and code that we're having to face. And that is why, when you ask, how did we get here today? We got here today because, interestingly enough, a very nascent government in the late 18th century said, we can make some money off of this. So to take you from colonial era Church of England to 2012, Doug and I standing on the stage at University of Idaho was initially a tax grab. I mean, that's kind of a big leap. But if you want to know how we got here today, it goes back to collection of revenue and taking a role of the state incursion or impeding upon a church's role.
You also still have time to cross-examine Doug and ask some questions.
My big question is then, how do we protect? So I see where there's some corollaries of concern or interest on our part. How do we then protect these loving couples? Because as you said, there's the liberty of, you don't care about the neighbors down the street that they may be sharing a household together or be a loving couple, but how are they protected again at a time of need or a time of death that is afforded to anybody that can pay that fee at the courthouse?
My approach to that whole category of issue would be attacking the size of the Leviathan, attack the size of our government, and if we cut the government in half, they will hassle everybody half as much. And if we get between the hogs and the bucket, if we successfully implement a don't spend money your great-grandchildren don't have yet, if we do that and we successfully stand against the overblown state and it reduces the hassle factor on absolutely everybody, it's going to reduce the hassle factor for everybody, right? Everybody who's living in this country. The issue that I'm concerned about in this debate is that it's a fight over legitimacy, not over hassles. And Christians from my persuasion cannot grant legitimacy to it. We cannot say that's marriage. We cannot countenance. We believe that it's a sinful behavior, a sinful expression. So we can't grant legitimacy to it. The fact that I believe that other people in the world and are afflicted with various sins, as I am afflicted with various sins, that doesn't mean that if I believe that someone is sinning in a particular area, I have to go torment them or go attack them or poke them with a stick because they're a sinner. That's not what we're talking about. But if they want to say, we want you to grant that this is just like what you have. This is the same thing that you have. That's something I can't grant. So what I would want to attack the hassle factor by reducing the size of government drastically. That's what I would want to do. And I would say, let's do that before we do anything else, before we proceed any further. Because we are not in a position, we're conscience bound, not to grant legitimacy to homosexual marriage by calling it marriage calling it by the same name that we apply to heterosexual unions.
Well, on the size of government, I think we're on the same page there. And that is, but they don't have, one doesn't have to go before the other. So again, we're dealt with the cards of an overbloated federal government, and in many cases, some states, oversized state government. That's the terrain we occupy. And there are many of us here in this room who are working to do just that, reduce the size of government and government's role in our lives. But as you said, you were talking about you, the individual, and members of your parish not having to support or give countenance to that status. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that regardless if you're gay or straight, a marriage certificate from a courthouse does not guarantee approval or designation by any church or any faith, any temple, you name it. As I said, in my church, there are published what's called 3 bans or 3 notices. You can have that courthouse certificate, and Father Sloan still doesn't have to marry you, regardless of your orientation. So I think that, at least from my perspective, and maybe not everybody in the gay community would agree with this, is that what I'm seeking in legal status recognition, I'm not looking for a global seal of approval before any particular faith or church. I would like that to come from mine, particularly because that's where I practice. But what I'm looking for at a minimum is that legal status. And again, a church can decide not to do that, and there is no precedent for the government telling a church not to do so.
But would you consider, let's say, a sermon preached by a minister outside your faith community, let's say in your state or where you are, gay marriage is legalized, you want to take advantage of it, but you read in the paper that Pastor so-and-so has preached a sermon, a thunder, lightning, and blue ruin sermon against it, and then he is attacked for hate speech. Do you think it's possible, this goes back to my question about morally serious opponents, do you believe that sort of thing is hate speech?
It depends on what's being said, right? So I think in a broad context, no. But if someone is told that they are less than or they're not a child of God, this goes back to a bigger issue than marriage. I know that one of the biggest struggles for gays who are people of faith is being told that they are not a child of God or they're not loved. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. There are cases where young men and women have been turfed out or been put out of their homes because they happen to say to their parents, "Hey mom, hey dad, I think I'm gay or I am gay," and then they're pushed out. Or in worst case scenarios, they're pushed out of their faith community. That is where you get into the discussion about hate speech. I do, however, when there is a dialogue and there's a decision, and you have the histrionics of advocates for equality measures immediately knee-jerking, calling a different perspective, even a direct different opinion as hate speech is not okay. And that is something that we're faced with. To answer your question, in the District of Columbia where I reside, there are those pastors who have said, "I know that you can get married in the courthouse, but I don't have to recognize that." And even within my own faith, I happen to be, like I mentioned earlier, I happen to be Episcopalian. The diocese there, the bishop put out a notice to all the parishes when that passed at the legislative level and said, there's a legal recognition in the District of Columbia based on where we are with our protocols and our policies. If you, the individual priest or parish priest or rector, want to recognize that you can, I, the bishop, am not telling you to do that. And the state didn't impede upon that. Now, were there people who might have called that hate speech? Probably. And if they did, that was inappropriate.
Okay.
Got it? Yeah.
Okay, now we move over to Doug's opportunity to cross-examination of Clarke Cooper. 15 minutes, thank you.
Okay, did you say 15?
15.
15, okay. I was gratified to hear you say that you thought there was room for discussion with the caterer, the bed and breakfast guy, the photographer. But I'd like to issue an invitation for you to make your opposition to that kind of thing more robust. All right? It's not just a matter of discussion, but do you agree that in a free society, as you envision under libertarian terms, not only would homosexuals have the right to marry, however they define it, but a caterer would have the right to have nothing to do with it?
Right, and this goes to the type of business. So some of you may be thinking, wait a minute, I'm thinking lunch counter, 1964, Montgomery. So the question is, there are businesses everywhere that have their portfolio is determined based on if they want to serve their clientele. You know, a home builder does not have to build a house, a custom home for you. They can deny a client for any particular reason. So this goes into a much more in the weeds aspect of the law that I'm prepared to talk about tonight. But there is actually a legal difference between someone walking into a restaurant and saying, I would like service, and being told, no, you know, you're a gay guy, I'm not going to serve you, versus someone who may be seeking particular client services. But again, I'm not equipped to go into that level of legal detail, but there is precedent there where there's access to goods and services, and if it's a mom and pop, and I don't know what the threshold is, there is room there. But again, it doesn't mean that cases may not be brought forward. You can't. That's what the part you can't predict.
So, do you see why anybody with our convictions would say, well, why don't you guys work that out before you take one step further in this equality business? Because we have businesses. We have beds and breakfasts. We have photographers. We have all these people. We've got that poor gentleman at the head of Chick-fil-A, you know, that poor little buddy.
And Mr. Cathy's entitled to his opinion.
Well, some people didn't think so.
And they were very poor actors. We were very clear about our position on that. Obviously, I'm standing here because log cabin Republicans are proponents for marriage equality, but we certainly aren't going to shout down Mr. Cathy's position on that. And as much as I love those waffle fries, I can also vote with my feet. I don't have to eat those waffle fries, but I also don't need to roadblock the person that actually wants to spend their money. This goes back to the case of individual liberty. If somebody wants to patronize that business, by all means. And it is his money, but it's also my freedom and liberty to disagree with Mr. Cathy. It's also my liberty and freedom to choose not to patronize that business. It is why Fox News actually did point out the position we laid out about that when that whole brouhaha blew up, which seems like yesterday, which was, you know, we can have difference of opinion on here, and here's how this can be how this can be staked out in a fashion that's respectable. So yes, so obviously he and I are opposed on the issue, but I'm not roadblocking the driveway to Chick-fil-A.
Okay, so because of the legal deep weeds, you're not prepared to say precisely where you think that line is, but you believe there's a line where the owners of private businesses up to a point should be able to give the raspberry to a customer.
For example, if hunting clubs, I'm sure they have them here in Idaho. I mean, there are businesses. Well, I grew up, we had hunting clubs, and not everybody got to get in. But there are legal thresholds. So, you know, there was a time in the United States where if you were Jewish, you couldn't be a member of a hunting club or a country club if you were a certain race. You know, in some parts of the country, being American Indian was a lot more difficult than being black, believe it or not, based on all the history we know. But yeah, I mean, there are places in the South. I mean, I was born in the 70s, so this is all history for me. This is not personal knowledge where it would say, you know, whites, blacks, no Indians. getting to certain goods and services, though, there is a difference between saying you cannot even come in or have access to this good or service versus what would be considered, again, that certain threshold. Is it a boutique or a mom and pop? And I don't know that. But I do know that when you look at, and the reason I mentioned hunting clubs or private, like supper clubs, there are certain thresholds where the law does protect that proprietor from being forced to have to maybe serve somebody that they don't want to serve.
So do you think it would be fair for us to say, why don't all the advocates for marriage equality for homosexuals get all the bugs worked out of that and get your agreement together before we take one step further in this direction? Because we suspect we're going to get hosed. Considering
that, at least on the people who are proponents of marriage, most of them statistically are business owners themselves. I would be hard pressed to find a business owner who wants to have something else that would impact them. So take away anything that's related to the debate or discussion on who can get married, who can't get married. No one who's a business owner, and this is why when the people ask the question, how are there gay Republicans? Well, they're usually in the private sector who have a bottom line they have to meet and they have a payroll to meet. So again, the people that I know who are involved in the advocacy for legal status, legal recognition, they too are worried about government overreach. They too are worried about being able to cut checks at the end of the month. So I don't see the advocates who are actually the lead on this wanting to hurt the private sector, because they would be hurting themselves in return.
All right, let me move on to a related issue. Are you familiar with the Bob Jones Supreme Court case, the interracial dating case? A couple decades ago, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided against Bob Jones, which had blacks and whites both enrolled, but they had a school policy against interracial dating. They prohibited it. And the IRS wanted to take their tax-exempt status away from them. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and their IRS 501c3 status was removed from them because their interracial dating policies conflicted with the policies of the United States, the formal policies of the United States. The tax exemption was considered a gift from the government to this private organization. Now, I'm not in any way, shape, or form defending the merits of that policy of Bob Jones, which I think was a boneheaded policy. But once the government starts taking away our rights to be boneheads, where would we be? So you said earlier you don't think that anybody would be endangered by this, but that went to the Supreme Court. They decided against Bob Jones. Well, let's say the federal government has, as a matter of formal policy in the military throughout its hiring and everything, it's the public policy of the United States that you must have equality with regard to sexual orientation. A private institution that is 501c3 is not in compliance, disagrees with that, won't practice it, and would regard it as a failure of their mission if they were forced to, and would rather shut down. Would you want colleges, schools, K through 12 schools, churches that were 501c3 to be left alone by the federal government on that issue?
Depends on what those institutions were. So we know at a state level, this is already in place, actually. So what Doug's describing, which is similar to, there's a federal piece of legislation called ENDA, that's the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, and it's what I touched upon earlier, where a lot of companies in this country have that voluntarily. So large companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Dow Chemical, Nike, these are companies who've already decided on their own out of corporate governance, hey, this is good for recruitment, this is good for retention, good for morale, et cetera. And some states have it. I think the closest state here, and I'll find out when I go do my 2-mile jog tomorrow, over in Washington, they have something like an employment non-discrimination. But what exists on the books at a state level, there are those exemptions to certain institutions. And I know that what is being sought at the federal level is to include that in the EEO line. Again, one of the cold shower reminders, for me at least, after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was, as we were saying, wow, that dark cloud has passed us. People don't have to be looking over their shoulder like they're going to get thrown out because either they are or they're rumored to be gay. And I heard from a waitress from Meridian, Mississippi, a Waffle House. I don't know if you have Waffle House out west, but they're really awesome back east.
This waffle theme is turning up again and again.
And she said, Mr. Cooper, I still could lose my job tomorrow. Again, this is a workaday wage earner. I suspect because she was a Meridian or outside of Meridian that people probably didn't know she was a lesbian. She probably had a very private life. But at the end of the day, it was I don't want to, I live in fear of losing my job because someone might say something at some point. That's what an ENDA is. It is why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said no impact. NFIB, which some of you all may be members of, the National Federation of Independent Business Owners, have ruled no impact. Why is that important? It's important because if business owners, if companies thought non-discrimination status was a net negative to their profit line or to their recruitment intention, there would be no interest or support for this legislation. Interestingly enough,
So why do there have to be laws then?
Well, again, people prior to EEO, people could be fired summarily for any particular reason that wasn't related to the merit. If you are a slack employee and you don't do your job, hit the road.
But why should the government be allowed to tell an employer when and under what circumstances he may fire an employee?
We currently live in a country where we have a Civil Rights Act that was signed several decades ago. And unless that's repealed, that's what we work under, and that's what we're navigating as individuals and as business owners. So that's what's in play.
Are there any principles that were established in the civil rights movement that need to be revisited because of this issue?
I do believe, and I think this goes back to the nuance we were talking about earlier. There are, and we know this because it's in place already at a lower level, at a municipal state level, where certain entities are not impacted or demanded or impeded upon on certain aspects of that. So again, we're talking, I think, a little different between a Nike corporation and maybe an institution, as you said, a 501c3 status. I mean, this is something that has been addressed at state level. So there's a patchwork right now, and that's part of the issue, that's part of the challenge when it comes to the employment issue. What happens in Washington is not what happens in Idaho, what's not happens in Texas, what doesn't happen in New York. So you do have some interstate compact issues where there either is some protection or no protection, and it is muddled. It is muddled.
When I said that, when I asked the question, are there any aspects of the Civil Rights Act that we want to go back and revisit, it was not because I'm in any way questioning the appropriateness of the government adopting a colorblind status with regard to its own dealings. Whatever the government's doing, it ought to be colorblind. That's what it means to be the government. But it seems to me that we're looking at some downstream fruit where the government now assumes the right to come into private small businesses and tell them all kinds of things, down to what sort of light bulbs they've got to be using. And it seems to me that we need to retrace our steps and go back and say, did we admit a bad principle here? Is there a difference between a sin and a crime? Bigotry, racism, bigotry is a sin. It's a grievous sin. But should it be criminal? All right, should it be criminalized? It's the same sort of thing here. Even if you adopted your views about homosexual equality, gay rights, why do we bring the government into it? The government generally makes things worse. Time's up.
Thank you.
Now, we're okay.
Now Clarke has 10 minutes to respond to the questioning. Doug, you can go to them.
So we've heard tonight, maybe you were surprised or not surprised, where there have been some corollaries drawn on reduction of the size of government, the value of individual liberty, the value of religious freedom, and those are things that I personally value, and of course our organization values. But I do offer to leave you with this, that if you don't know someone who happens to be gay in your family, your neighborhood, your church, your school, or your community writ large, ask yourself what it would be like to be in that person's shoes and what challenges they may meet. Again, because we value as being born equal by our Creator, that you don't want to have additional barriers by government. You don't want the government, we don't want it impeding upon our being able to produce a profit, but no one should have to face additional hurdles in life because of what would be considered a gift from God. I initially struggled with the idea that I was born a minority. I mean, let's face it, there are a heck of a lot more straight people than there are gay people. That's statistical. It's the fact, and it's a minority status. Knowing that, then any kind of barrier or hurdle that's there, why allow for that to still be there? I do appreciate the fact that there are those who are willing to at least engage in the dialogue and ask the question of, how does this impact us as a community? How does their God-given orientation impact their day-to-day life? Should they be an incorporate member of our community, or should they be cast aside in a different community? But think about what it would be like to be involuntarily in a minority status, because I tell you, it's a real kick in the pants when you realize that's something you're at, because race you can't change. A lot of gay men and women you may or may not know because they haven't revealed that or haven't shared that with you, either out of fear, and in many cases it's often fear. So be it marriage status, be it legal protections before the law, or just having the comfort of knowing that you're loved by your family, you're loved by your neighbors, and you're not an outcast in your community, those are important aspects to think about when you're looking at, does this neighbor, does this family member, do they deserve the same access, the same ability, the same freedom to succeed, or the freedom to fail? Again, there are no guarantees in success or failure, but boy, it'd be nice to not have to go to those extra lengths. And for many men and women who happen to be born gay, there's that extra hurdle. So I leave you with asking yourself what it'd be like to be in that position. Just for a moment, know what that challenge would be, because it isn't fun, and it is scary. And if you're a younger person who maybe doesn't have access to resources, information, or a supportive family, it can also be dangerous. So again, there's a lot we covered here beyond marriage, which is actually, I'm happy to say, we didn't say myopically focused on that, because there's a lot more that's important out there than this one issue. But it is a very important topic. And thank you very much for your time and being able to share with you guys.
Thank you, Clarke. Doug, you have 2 minutes.
So I've made a distinction between certain negative rights, or rights negatively defined, leave me alone in these specified areas, and positive rights, what I called free chocolate milk for everybody. But surely it's more than how it's stated, whether negatively or positively. Couldn't a master of circumlocution cast gay rights as a leave me alone issue? The answer is that certainly he could do that. And so it's not a matter of abstract individual rights negatively stated. It's not just make sure you get it into a sentence where you state it in this form. We have no right to be left alone across the board in every area. We live in society. We have obligations to God and to one another. We have the God-given right to be left alone in certain specified areas in our nation, gun purchases, for example, free speech for another, free assembly for another. But you don't have the right to be left alone in the production of child porn. You don't have the right to be left alone with that abortion decision. The child is present, which means that you are not alone. Rights come from somewhere, and it isn't the government. It's crucial to emphasize this. Rights come from somewhere, and it isn't the government. If we assert the doctrine of rights anywhere, and this would include any discussion of gay rights, we have to be prepared to defend the content of what we have said. The Declaration addresses this question quite well, I think, when it says that men are, quote, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Note what this presupposes. It presupposes that atheism is wrong, that rights come from God, not from the government, and that rights cannot be therefore legitimately taken away from someone by the government. It presupposes that atheistic evolution is not the case, endowed by their Creator. If there is no God, then whatever rights, quote unquote rights, we may have are granted by mankind in the collective, which is to say the government. And that also means that your particular case will be handed from department to department up to the final arbitration group, affectionately called the death panel. If the state gives rights, the state can take them away. If the state gives rights, the state can take them away. If God gives us our rights, then other men cannot take them away. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. But if God gives us these rights, if it's not just boilerplate, if it's not just us appealing to God as the cosmic placeholder, if we want to seriously maintain that our rights come from God, then we have to be prepared to answer questions about how we think we know what God did. How do we know what God did? The answer has to be that He tells us. God is there and He reveals Himself. A God who exists but who is also silent cannot be appealed to as the source of any rights whatever, because the question always arises, how can you know that? And that will shut every conversation down. A silent God is a God who is silent on the subject of rights also. A God who speaks on the subject of rights is the God of revelatory religion, which means that He's the Father of Jesus Christ. So God does reveal Himself, and He tells us that we have rights because we bear His image. We have rights because the image of God is to be respected and honored. Moreover, He also describes for us the nature of this image. I alluded to this earlier when I cited Genesis 1:27, which says, "So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them." A little bit later in Genesis 9, it says that it requires capital punishment if someone is to be killed. Even an animal is to be killed if it kills someone. It says because man is created in the image of God. We were created in the image of God, Genesis 1, before the fall, and described this way. In Genesis 3, mankind falls into sin, but we see in Genesis 9 that the fall did not eradicate the image of God. It defaced it, it marred it, but it didn't obliterate it. We still bear the image of God post-fall. Now God describes this image as, in the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. When we think of the imago Dei, the image of God, we ought to think less of things like the capacity for abstract rationalization and more about boys and girls. Jesus teaches us the importance of this image bearing when He is discussing the believer's relationship to Caesar, which interestingly is the same topic that is before us now in this discussion of gay rights. Everything that we're talking about has to do with marriage and family and people who are attached to each other and how this relates to Caesar. What does Caesar have to say about this? What does the state have to say about it? What does the local government have to say about it? What does the federal government have to say about it? What does Caesar think? So Jesus is in a political discussion. They tried to trap Him by maneuvering him into betraying the Jewish people by acting like a quisling, acting like a turncoat, or saying something inflammatory where they could go tell the Romans that he was speaking in an incendiary way. So they asked, is it lawful to pay tax to Caesar or not? And he asked for a coin. And they brought it. And he saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. That's from Mark 12. If it has Washington's image on it, if it's got Washington's picture on it, as your quarters do, it is appropriate to ship it off to Washington. If Washington manages to get its picture on this coin, then it's permissible to render that which has Caesar's image on it back to Caesar. That's a lawful thing to do. But Jesus says, render to God the things that are God's. There's an implication here, and it really is profound. If it has God's image on it, it may not be rendered to Caesar and must be rendered to God instead. What has God's image on it? Your money has Caesar's image on it. What has God's image on it? You do. All right? And what does that image look like? This is the other thing we have to keep in mind, is that images look like things. Right? What does the image of God in man look like? Genesis 1:27 says it looks like male and female. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. That's what the image looks like. God was saying something about himself in how he imprinted his image on mankind, which was defaced in the fall, and that defacement had sexual ramifications, as we see throughout the history of the Old Testament and the history of the world. But nevertheless, when Jesus comes to restore all things, he's coming to restore that image. He's coming to put things back together. So, if it has God's image on it, it may not be rendered to Caesar. It's not up to Caesar. Caesar doesn't have the authority to come down and write his image, whatever the current policy is, if it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, or if you're in the Middle East, or if you're in an autocratic government in Eastern Europe, let's say. If you're in a situation like that, Caesar doesn't have the right to say, okay, I know what let's do, and then impose his image on mankind, because you may not render that to Caesar. This means that the locus of rights, and we're talking about rights, the place where God's image must be centrally respected is the holiest place in the temple. If you think about the temples and religious houses of worship, the holiest place is where where you come and you say, here's the altar, or here's the high altar, this is the central place. What is that central place in this world? Where do we find God's image most clearly represented? In the created order, we find it in marriage. And in the gospel, we find it in the marriage of Christ and his church. In the gospel, we have the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus for the sins of the world. Jesus died to save his people. And the gospel is therefore a marriage, and it's not a homosexual marriage. The gospel is a marriage, and it's not a homosexual marriage. And so one of the reasons why this whole thing elicits such a passionate response from us is we see that the gospel is at stake. Public definitions in the public square are threatening God's gift to us of our salvation. I do want to add one quick thing. I do believe that there are homosexuals who are children of God, and I believe that they are sinners just like the rest of us. I believe that that's why we need Jesus. That's why the image of God must be restored in us.
Thank you, Doug. We now move to closing remarks. Each debater will have 5 minutes to close everything out, and then we'll move to Q&A. So be thinking of your questions, and after each debater has their closing remarks, we'll move to Q&A, and the mics will be here in the aisle. So be thinking of your questions, and go ahead, Clarke.
So I apologize for jumping ahead and doing the thank you earlier. But as we close on this issue, that is the point. Caesar, the state, already did impose upon us back in the 1700s. So this imposition isn't new. It's several hundred years old. As I said earlier, remember, the church had the full province of marriage in colonial America. not the state. And then the state said we can make some money. And so selling of certificates, taxation of marriage, Caesar did impede upon the role of marriage. It's, again, going back to Doug's question, how did we get here? We got here because of that first imposition back in the late 18th century in colonial America, which was the crown at the time. So yeah, so Caesar has taken a bite. And again, we're combating that even still on overreach. DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, that's not a local piece of legislation. That is a federal statute that, depending on if you're for marriage equality or even if you have no feelings about it, it impedes upon states' rights. What DOMA does is DOMA says no state, no entity can have interstate recognition. So again, there are those who theorize there's an argument that's being made that it violates the Constitution from an interstate aspect. There are those who argue that it violates states' rights. So again, going back to the role of Caesar, the state can take away. It did. So, if the concern is where's the church's role in marriage, the state took it away several hundred years ago and has continued to do so. It did it by selling marriage certificates and continued to sell them, and it did it with the passing and implementation of the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA. So knowing that, again, if you're a proponent for marriage equality or the freedom to marry, or if you're a proponent for lesser government, there are multiple cases for saying to the federal government, you should get out of the marriage business. And if a church does not want to provide marital recognition or marital status to any couple, again, gay or straight, for whatever reason, the government's not there to tell them to do that. But if the government's going to stay in the marriage business and sell marriage certificates and continue to collect tax so that we render unto Caesar, then that should be done in an equitable fashion for those couples who are seeking that legal status, and keep that in the courthouse. But unless the government takes a position of saying we're completely out of the marriage business, which I doubt they will do, because again, it's a lot of revenue that they've been collecting for several hundred years. I would be shocked if states just decided to walk away from that. That would be the equivalent of saying we're not going to do driver's license anymore. I mean, never mind the regulatory aspect of the roads, but they make money off of that. So I think if you want to do tabula rasa, we could do that, but we're not going there. So again, put your place in the, as I said earlier, of an individual who is faced with these challenges day to day and these impediments. And also remember that if a state issues a license or recognition, it does not mean a church has to. So, and I'll thank you one more time because I overshot it the first time. Thank you very much. So, good night.
Thank you, Clarke. 5 minutes, closing remarks.
Clarke has said several times that we're not going to be able to get back to a tabula rasa. We're not going to be able to get back to a blank slate where we get rid of a lot of this extraneous government. Well, I'd like to give it a try anyway. And I'd like to have at it seriously first, not to get back to an absolute blank slate, but really to fight back the encroachments that have created a lot of these problems for us. So when we say that that the government is the problem, has created a lot of these problems, well then let's fight that. Let's roll it back. Instead, if we say, oh, it's been 250 years, it's been 300 years, things have gotten pretty tangled, well, that's an argument for not adding another round of the tangles. Let's stop doing it. Let's roll it back instead of making it worse. I've been alive long enough to see that every few years there's a hue and a cry in Washington for a new round of reforms, and it occurred to me a number of years ago that almost always they're yelling for us to reform the bad results from the previous wave of reforms. So what is it that Washington reforms? It's reforms of 10 years ago. And the reforms 10 years ago were reforms of the reforms of 10 years ago, and so on. Well, let's quit doing it. You know, if you have if you're watching a movie, you get a DVD and you put it in the DVD player and you're 10 minutes into the movie and it stinks, you don't try it again. Let's stop. Let's stop it. Let's not add to the tangles. I want to just point to a couple of things and a couple of things more. Clarke referred to DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, and I think you could fairly criticize the DOMA Act as not being pure federalism. It was an imposition, a federal imposition across all the states. But this was one of the reasons why conservatives were jumpy and resorted to this is because of how Roe v. Wade went down. Roe v. Wade was imposed on the states, and we discovered pretty quickly that it didn't matter that the vast majority of the states would not have the abortion laws we currently have. It was just imposed from on high. What they didn't want, and what we still don't want, is the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, which requires each state to honor the acts of another state. If you get a driver's license in one state, or if a heterosexual marriage in one state, it's recognized across state lines. The full faith and credit clause is the thin edge of the wedge that would make sure that no state could govern its affairs in this matter in the way that they desire to. The last point I would like to make in my remaining 2 minutes is that I was listening pretty carefully, and I'm pretty sure that Clarke did not answer my polygamy question. The argument, and again, I'm not arguing that Clarke is arguing for polygamy, or that Clarke thinks that what I'm saying about how bisexual might argue is true. I'm not saying that he's signing on to that, but I did not hear from him an argument that would prohibit a polygamist from using all of his arguments and have them be applicable straight across. He said he tried to dismiss it as a non-issue because he says he's aware of no bill that has been introduced and so forth. Yeah, that's because after the gay marriage battle is won, wait for about 10 minutes, all right? About 10 minutes after the gay battle is won by homosexual activists, the polygamists are next in line. They will be here. It's already starting. It's already moving. And basically, I'm perfectly prepared to take your opposition to get to that together with me. And I would say, Clarke, you and I are going to go debate the polygamists. We've got it set up for a couple of years from now. I need some arguments. Give me some arguments. You left the key under the mat, man. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll take about a 2-minute break, so those who would like to leave can go ahead and head out, and then we'll start with Q&A here in about 2 minutes, so thank you very much. We're now ready to move on to Q&A, and before we get started, I'm going to go over a couple house rules. First, please keep your questions short and to the point. Start off by stating your name and then jump into your question. This will help Q&A flow better, and everyone will be able to have a chance to ask a question too. Second, if you go over, go too long, and I think everyone's been nice here tonight, I don't think your questions will go too long. If you do go long, I will ask you to bring your question to a close nicely, and then if you keep going, then our nice mic man over there might just turn off the mic. If that happens, he'll turn off the mic. Thirdly, keep your questions on topic. Don't ask the debaters who they think is going to win the Super Bowl. We all know that's the Dallas Cowboys, so...
Wait a minute.
America's team. Please keep your questions in line with the topic of the debate tonight. And lastly, I'll make sure we rotate between mics so we can even form 2 lines here if comfortable. And that would be helpful so everyone can move up closer to the mics. We plan on going for about 30 minutes, and we'll reassess where we're at after 30 minutes. Thanks for honoring these house rules. Really appreciate it, and let the questions begin. Go ahead.
My name is Keely. Mr. Wilson knows me. Mr. Cooper. I am a Trinitarian, heterosexual Christian woman. I am a Democrat, though, and I'm sorry. It's hard to be one in Idaho. Mr. Wilson, last year you presided over the marriage of a not heterosexual man to a heterosexual woman. I'm sure you're aware that psychiatrists, behavioral scientists, and doctors all agree that pedophilia is a distinct sexual orientation. Homosexual, heterosexual, like those two, pedophilia is also a distinct sexual orientation, and yet you enthusiastically presided over the wedding of a pedophilic man and a heterosexual woman. So I'm wondering if you can understand my dismay that you would privilege that marriage over any number of loving, committed, monogamous, self-sacrificing marriages or relationships between two men and two women. Second, as a classicist and a Bible teacher, I'm sure you're aware that nowhere in Scripture is the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19 ascribed to a sexual root. In fact, as a classicist,
A sexual what? I'm sorry.
to a sexual root. In other words, it's not considered to be an expression of sexuality. It's by Bible studies, by Bible scholars and non-Bible scholars, it's considered to be an example of what we would call maybe battlefield humiliation, the grossest type of inhospitality that uses the male genitals as a weapon to demean, subjugate, humiliate, and in fact conquer in this case, the three guests of Lot. As a Bible teacher, you often, although I appreciate that you didn't today, use the word sodomite in describing male homosexuals. So, to sum it up, I'm wondering if you can understand my dismay at your preferring or privileging that marriage over the marriages that I and Mr. Cooper would like to see privileged by law, the pedophile and the heterosexual woman. And are you willing to repent of your incorrect, grammatically and etymologically, use of the word sodomite in describing homosexual men?
Thank you, Keeley.
Okay. Very quickly, I believe that I would be happy to preside over, as I did, I'd be happy to officiate at a wedding of someone who has been guilty of child abuse in the past and who had repented and was addressing, doing what he ought to be doing. I would do the same thing for a homosexual. I would preside over, I'd officiate at a wedding of someone who had been in the homosexual lifestyle and wanted to marry a woman. I'd do the same thing. I don't see any double standard there at all. With regard to the use of the word sodomy and
Sodomite.
Sodomite and sodomy, with regard to that, in the book of Jude, it explicitly says that that God judged Sodom. It was not just for the sin of inhospitality, although Ezekiel mentions that.
1649.
Right. See, I knew it was there too. Yeah. So
you're paid to.
So in Jude, it says that the inhabitants of Sodom were guilty of the same sin that the angels who lusted after strange flesh were guilty of. There in Jude, the sin of Sodom is described in the New Testament in explicitly sexual terms.
Next question. Thank you, Keeley.
Hi, I'm McKay Babb. I'm a student here at the U of I. My question is directed towards Wilson. And I am curious to know what your definition of a bisexual is.
My definition of a bisexual is someone who is attracted sexually to both sexes.
To both sexes, okay. My curiosity is, with having that definition, several times you use that key example of a bisexual as an example throughout what you talked about, to talk about your argument about polygamy, about
But at least three, yeah.
If you have a bisexual, that would open the doors for a three-way marriage type situation. To my knowledge, a bisexual doesn't have sexual relations with a man and woman at the same time.
In the same life, though.
Huh?
In the same life, he does.
Yeah.
But those who do should have the right to express it maritally, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then three.
Right. The
Just
thing
do
is,
Just do the math.
the thing is, well, I'm doing the math, and the math is that I know if I was a bisexual and I had a boyfriend, and all of a sudden I came home with a girlfriend, he would have a problem with that.
How come? Where's the hate, man?
It's cheating.
If you're bisexual, if this is your sexual orientation and you have a sexual attraction to males and females both,
So you're saying that it happens at the same time?
well, it can.
I'm not saying it can't, but I would say
If it
that
does,
most of the time it
okay,
doesn't.
Okay, it can, and if it does, and that's his orientation, then shouldn't he have the right to express it maritally?
Okay.
And that gives you 3.
All right.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a bit taller than most of you. So, my name is Dane Mills. I'm this one?
No, who are you stating your question to? Your
Oh,
name and who
Mr.
you're
Wilson.
stating- okay, thank you.
So, I'm a high school student here at Moscow High School. I'm a senior. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your amazing public speaking skills. It was very well presented. I disagree vehemently with everything you said, but it was delivered expertly. I enjoy a good show of Jeopardy. Do you enjoy Jeopardy? Do you have a show that you? Is there a TV show that you enjoy?
Man, not really.
Cowboys winning the Super Bowl.
Okay.
Okay,
I personally like Jeopardy.
okay.
But say that my religion states that no one can watch a Jeopardy on a Wednesday. Your religion does not state that. So would it be all right if I go around telling everyone else that they can't watch Jeopardy on Wednesday just because my beliefs say that they can't?
Right.
So what I'm getting to here is that was there a difference between my religion saying you can't watch Jeopardy on Wednesdays and your religion saying that I can't marry another man?
Right. Right. This is the Starbelly Sneetches argument. Basically, if you've got one strongly held set of views from one religion and another set of views, and then why should this group A get to impose on group B?
Exactly.
Right? Well, I'm saying there's group C that steps in with religious presuppositions and tells group A and group B to quit picking on each other. And I'm saying that group C is as religiously grounded as anybody else. Group C, when you call for an open society or public tolerance and that sort of thing, that you have to give reasons for why that's a good thing. Not everybody in this world believes it's a good thing. I do. I like a free society. I like our small r Republican form of government. I like open discourse. I like it. I want to preserve it. But I have to be prepared to give reasons for it. And those reasons are ultimately going to be grounded in your worldview. You can't just appeal to individual rights and can't we all get along without saying, well, why should we? Why?
Well, I think that what I got from your argument on the floor was that a polygamous marriage and homosexual marriage were the same thing on the same grounds of that if we give marriage rights to one, we have to give it to the other.
Right.
I disagree because a gay or lesbian marriage is still between two people, not polygamy.
Yeah, but why is two sacred? Who says? That's a private religious view of yours.
No, I'm an atheist. I don't have any religious views, so
Right,
I think that.
So why does your atheistic view that two and only two gets to be? Why does that get to be imposed on Muslims?
Because three's company.
Right, so you see,
Well, because
it's not whether,
depending,
but
it
it's
doesn't
not
matter
whether, but
what
which.
your genitalia is. There's still love between two people.
But why are you limiting it to two? It's
Because
sounding
three's
superstitious.
Well, because that's like cheating. It's immoral.
Yeah, I agree. It's cheating.
Yeah.
I agree. It's cheating.
Which is why
but
polygamy and marriage between two men or two women is not the same, because you still have the two people. So they're
okay.
still in.
There are people in the world. There are people in the world who do not believe that going beyond the boundaries of two is cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Why does your definition of cheating trump theirs?
Well, the Bible says that you can have two wives. I mean, look at Jacob. Yeah,
Thanks. Go ahead and let the next in line. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Good
Go ahead,
idea.
Let's do the Wilson line over here. Go ahead and Wilson line. Go over here. Everyone in the Wilson line. Great. Thank you. and then in the Cooper line.
We figured it out eventually.
Good point. Okay.
Mr. Cooper,
Man
thanks.
in the blue, go.
Thanks. Mr. Cooper, thanks for your presentation. My name is Matthew Cunningham from Portland, Oregon. I'm in danger of sounding like a clanging cymbal. I just want to get at this argumentation that Mr. Wilson was making, particularly in terms of how by opening up the definition of marriage to homosexuals doesn't become a slippery slope to polygamists. I'm not necessarily interested in the response that you made in terms of no legislation on the floor, but primarily in terms of the logic that Mr. Wilson has presented.
Sure. So again, we're back to the issue of the polygamy issue, which again, there is not a push for that. There is not support for that. And if you want to look at, there's not a legal foundation precedent for that in the U.S. So if you take the religious aspect of marital status, again, courthouse versus parish, except for that one period of time when Utah carved out their own colony and carved themselves out of federal jurisdiction for a short period of time in U.S. history, the U.S. judicial precedent and legislative precedent is for a couple. And some of that precedent is based on our Judeo-Christian foundation. So as to the question of that Doug raised earlier and that is still being discussed as to, well, how is this a slippery slope? It isn't, because what's being argued is the precedent of a couple, one individual and another individual. And is that the jurisdiction of a state awarding and recognizing that status, or is that also a shared jurisdiction by a faith community where they may recognize or not recognize that status? But to date, we do not have, in any jurisdiction in the United States, legal recognition of polygamous couples in any jurisdiction. And that is also not just state as well. I know that Doug raised a concern offline, so I mean, we didn't get a chance to do it, but I think this is a good time to keep talking about it. He said, well, what about, because I think there's been a lot of focus on the historic roots of Mormonism in our country. He said, well, what about the Muslim influence in this country? And this goes back to, again, the legal precedent is, yeah, you could have a family that might emigrate to the United States where they may have come from a state where that's recognized. Many Muslim or Islamic states don't, but there is not that legal precedent in the U.S. For what would be defined as multiple marital partners or polygamous partners.
Right. And I would say, yes, there isn't a precedent for that except for the Mormon exception in the 19th century. But 20 years ago, there wasn't a precedent for what we're talking about now. Things change.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name's Connor Kennelly. I'm a student here at the University of Idaho. Thanks for both your time. One thing I'd like to clarify, the guy at the front who was talking about bisexuality, what he was trying to say is that bisexuality is a different dimension from monogamy or polygamy. It refers to who you're attracted to, not how many people you're in a relationship with at the same time. So I think that's what he was trying to say.
But the question is, why put any limits on it? Why should outsiders put any limits on it?
That didn't seem to be the topic of the debate here. The topic of the debate here seems to be extending marriage rights to gay individuals.
Right, and my argument again,
well,
go
so
ahead.
I'm saying that we have the number of 2 already established in the country. Whether or not that's the correct number can be another matter entirely. It's just a question of, does that 2 between a man and a woman or between other couples as well, of just 2? That's not my question here. So I think I was just trying to say, that's what he was trying to say earlier. Okay. My question is, refers to the fact that discrimination, I didn't hear that word more than once. If I took a drink for every time I heard discrimination, it'd be like I'd just taken communion. It was not brought up by either of you very much, and that really confuses me because you have one group, a majority of heterosexuals, receiving legal rights like spousal privileges, hospital visits, protection on the Constitution for law, stuff like that, being granted, and then you have a minority group that isn't allowed to do that despite being in the same sort of relationship but not recognized by the state. So my question is what is your answer to that? Is that discrimination, or why isn't it discrimination? Or if it is discrimination, why is it okay?
You've got hundreds and thousands of different instances, but I would say sometimes it would be what we all would agree is discrimination in a bad sense. But a lot of times there are reasonable restrictions, for example, that hospitals put on visitors. I'm a pastor. I go to the hospital a lot and visit people, and people come and go and that sort of thing. In a perfect world, in my economic libertarian paradise, I believe that people ought to be able to be visited by whoever they want to be visited by, and then you've got a problem. Well, he's in a coma, and then I'm his best friend. Then you've got a squabble in the waiting room, and you've got a problem there. So sometimes it's just a people tangle. Other times, I think it ought to just simply be let the people be with the people they want to be with, and not have this big bureaucratic apparatus that's trying to manage everything.
The bureaucratic apparatus is guaranteeing equal legal rights under the law. That's the same as the 14th Amendment. I guess my question is why is it okay to say that two people can't get married because they're the same sex, but it's not okay to say two people can't get married because of the same race? You don't choose your skin color any more than you choose who you're attracted to.
Well, that's one of the things that is under debate. That's one of the things we're debating. You'd be hard pressed to say that God didn't choose an individual's race. That'd be I've never heard anybody who tried to maintain the negative on that. But there are morally serious people who believe that homosexuality is a sin, not a racial characteristic or not a genetic thing. That's one of the things that's being debated. So if it's simply assumed that it's something that happened to you, is just the way you are, if that's assumed, then of course the debate's going to go in a particular way. But I don't think we have grounds for assuming that.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Question for Clarke Cooper.
Hi, my name is Carson Spratt. I'm a New St. Andrews student here in Moscow. I have a two-part question for you. In your speaking, you seem to define marriage as a loving relationship between two people. First, my question is, as a Christian, where did you get that definition in the Bible, as opposed to a marriage between a man and a woman? And second, what about the definition prevents it from being redefined by other people?
So marriage, actually, if you want to do biblical verse, if you go Old Testament, it's contractual too. So there are references to not so much the loving, there is a contractual relationship. Some of it is defined as a contractual relationship before God. Others, it's property. You go into an earlier time in history that has historic and biblical reference. It's a transactional. It's not about love. It is about making sure that the next generation continues and that the work gets done. But it has, in a modern definition, it has proceeded to love. So people, thankfully, can choose. We'd be hard pressed to find anybody here that was in arranged marriage sitting in Moscow in this auditorium today. In an earlier time, yes, there were arranged marriages and people didn't have a choice. But we as modern Christians can choose to marry who we want to be equally yoked with in life. So that is something that has changed over time.
So your definition isn't from the Bible per se, it's evolved?
Well, the definition of marriage in the United States today is inclusive of our Judeo-Christian foundation as well as our legal impact. And remember, we were talking about this today. The government inserted itself in the definition of marriage. So what we are, again, how did we get here today? We have our Judeo-Christian foundation in the United States, and we have legal boundaries that were drawn up going back to the beginning of this country. And so you go back to the root of marriage is a transactional to a marriage is also supportive and a relationship identity. But those things, it's not one thing. It is multiple influences from where we were to where we are, even pre-United States.
So you accept the country's definition as opposed to, you don't have a personal one that's from the Bible. It's what the country defines as marriage?
So are you asking my personal definition?
Yes, I've been asking.
Okay. My personal definition of marriage is a loving monogamous relationship, not a transactional, forced, arranged marriage for a contract. And this is somebody, when I do marry, I will choose to marry somebody who is equally yoked with me in my faith and in my finances and in my idea of being able to support a family. So that is how I seek a mate, is that I'm finding somebody that I can trust, that I can love, that we can share our love with God together. This is something I would imagine that some people are challenged if they're trying to find someone that they're equally yoked with. But my definition of marriage is being in a loving, monogamous relationship with somebody who can be on the same page with me in my faith and our proceeding in life together.
Thank you, Mr. Spratt. Thank you. Question for Doug.
Yes, I'm Ethan. Thank you both for coming. My question is taking us back to the title of the forum, which was, Do Gay Rights Conflict with Conservative Christian Values? Mr. Wilson, the Christian value that you emphasize is that marriage has been defined as between one man and one woman. And I would first of all question that. I would say that as we sort of talked about, marriage has had many different definitions, as in a man and where the woman was property, and a man, and you mentioned Solomon's 700 wives. There have been a variety of definitions. So I don't think that is the traditional Christian value to focus the debate on. For me, a traditional Christian value would be the life of Jesus as one of open acceptance and love, and supporting each other, especially the afflicted who are marginalized in society, and especially marginalized by religious leaders. That to me is the traditional Christian value. And isn't that exactly what marriage is about?
No.
Obviously, that's a response right there.
Obviously, marriage includes aspects of love and forgiveness and the things you're talking about. But marriage is a covenantal union with a sexual consummation. So there's two essential elements in a biblical marriage. There is the covenant that's made before God, and then there's the sexual consummation between a man and a woman. I do believe that polygamous unions, the sorts of things you see in the Old Testament, are sub-creational. They're broken marriages. They're messed up. You have all sorts of problems that you see for example, Jacob's wives and the great baby race was one of them, and Solomon's problems. So when you see the polygamous unions, they are described as marriages, but there's also something clearly wrong with them. And so I would go back to the creation order. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve and Sally and Susie and Henrietta. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. God created Adam and Eve and intended for them to be together. So that's a monogamous union between a man and a woman. Then you have the requirement in 1 Timothy 3 that a bishop, a Christian leader, a pastor must be a one-woman man. That's a requirement that's placed on church leadership. And then you have the example of Christ and the church. So the optimal marriage, I believe, is one man, one woman, one time. There are other forms of marriage that reflect the sinfulness of this messed up
But
world.
that are biblical.
What's that?
But that are biblical.
But that are they're seen in the Bible. They're discussed as marriages. They're described as marriages in the Bible, yes. But they're not endorsed as that's the way to go.
Okay, well, thank you for your response.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll end with 3 more questions, 2 for Clarke Cooper and 1 for Doug.
Mr. Clarke, it was kind of back to the whole polygamy thing, and Pastor Wilson kind of talked a little bit about it, and you didn't really get a chance to respond. So I was just going to ask you, I work with a lot of Muslim guys, and they are actively polygamous. They're talking about how they're going to marry their 4th wife and stuff. And that's not in our culture right now, but if it became a part of our culture, what would your argument be, and by what authority would you argue against it?
Right. Well, as a Christian, that's not what I believe in. But in a court of law or in a legislative body, it would be precedence. So if we were in a federal court, a state court, or the Supreme Court, you would be dealing on, as we practice in our judicial practice, is what's our foundation, what's our law. If it's a legislative body, then it's a little bit more open season in the sense that legislation does come from the people. So what you're talking about, the theory would be if there was any kind of move for something to endorse or ratify or memorialize polygamy, it would have to come, there would have to either be a legislative route where a legislator or a body of people, constituents, Muslim constituents maybe, again, we were talking about historical roots of Mormons, they don't do that anymore, would have to say, we want this. There isn't space for that in this country. I'm not saying there wouldn't be, I just don't see it as possibly happening. And then on the legal side, there isn't precedent for it. So if the question or the concern is, there's this looming threat because we have immigration influences or foreign immigrant influences coming into our country, if somebody has a polygamous background from their faith or their culture, the state doesn't have to endorse it, and the state doesn't endorse it.
I guess what I was trying to hint at, like, let's just say I was a polygamist, and I'm talking about marrying my third wife. What would your argument, moral argument, be against that?
Well, again, okay, so then now I'm stepping away from judicial and legislative. I've already said, as a Christian, that's not what I believe in. I do believe in a monogamous relationship. That's why I was saying earlier, one of the questions asked, how do you see marriage? Is that, God willing, I mean, I do live in a jurisdiction where I can get married. I haven't met anybody, and I'm working 7 days a week. But when the time comes, when I do find the right guy, it's going to be a fellow Christian who shares my values and my beliefs and understands that a monogamous relationship of two is what we see as a couple. So yeah, I personally, I don't get it. But again, that's, from my perspective as a Christian, when it comes to monogamy, that's my belief.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Coster, and I'm a student here at the U of I. So my first point would be that, Mr. Wilson, in one of your references, you talked about having a schizo neighbor, and I'd like to say that the demonizing of mental illness is not helpful in this or any other conversation. Second of all, I'd like to note that the discussion of polygamy has come up a lot, which was not necessarily on topic, and specifically that saying that allowing homosexual marriage would then lead to polygamy is a slippery slope argument, which is a logical fallacy. Third, my real question is about the Christian community and less about legal precedent. So a lot of times tonight you talked about homosexuality being a sin, which, whether or not you agree with that, I guess my argument is, in my understanding of Christianity, it is not up to us to decide what is sin, but that is God's final judgment. And so therefore, we've talked a lot about, do people have the right to turn down customers who maybe are homosexual or things like that. My question to the Christian community, and specifically to you, is why is that even an issue? If Christianity is supposed to be about being loving, about being accepting, why is that even in the dialogue? Why are people on earth trying to make those decisions, those moral judgments on people, rather than allowing that to be left to God? Thank you.
Let me start with that third one. This is an inescapable concept. It's not whether, but which. It's not whether you're going to identify other people's sins, but which ones you will identify. If, for example, I'm talking about a Christian caterer who refuses to give service to a homosexual wedding, you're saying, why can't he be tolerant and loving? Well, you're not being tolerant of his intolerance, right? You're judging him. You got to judge somebody, right? There's no way out. It's not whether we're going to judge, it's which sins we will judge. So my concern, and the reason for bringing up the caterer and the photographer, is that our society is vehement, vicious in judging certain sins, and very, very tolerant with regard to others. They like to pretend that they're tolerant across the board because they luxuriate in the tolerance that they recognize. So we live in the sort of society where a woman can be visibly 6 months pregnant and go get an abortion and have everybody defend her as her constitutional right. That should be protected. Leave the lady alone. And then if that same woman, 6 months pregnant, stands on the corner of 3rd and Main smoking a cigarette, she'll get all sorts of dirty stares. How dare you risk a low birth weight, right? Well, we're judging for something, right? The society enforces certain things. Now, in our society, we say that non-discrimination, lack of tolerance, that's the ultimate, you know, if you're intolerant, you're the ultimate one-toothed rube or corn pone. And they turn on you, they'll just let you have it. They are intolerant, all right? When you look at sitcoms, when you look at popular entertainment, there are certain behaviors that are actively scorned. They're actively scorned. And they're scorned because they're not tolerant like us, right? So basically, I would want to argue that in all societies, certain behaviors are accepted and praised and welcomed. Certain behaviors are not. They're rejected. Every society does that. Liberal societies do it, conservative societies do it, Muslim societies do it, Christian societies do it. But when you're doing it and you're living in a cocoon where everybody's doing the same thing at the same time, it's invisible. It's like the air you breathe.
Thank you. Last question.
Thanks for coming, gentlemen. I appreciate it. This directed to Mr. Cooper. My name is Rod Story. I'm just a private citizen. I guess I haven't been a student in a long time. Okay, sorry about that. My question for you, I found it to be of some interest to discuss the role of the IRS in determining who is a private, rewarding or penalizing someone who is a private company and allowing some movement in our liberal society to choose who you might discriminate against. And obviously we have organizations that do discriminate. One that comes to mind is I'm a Boy Scout. I was actually an Eagle Scout, and I appreciate that you were too. Boy Scouts have just reaffirmed that they will not include homosexuals that are actively proclaiming they are. They also discriminate against women. Boy Scouts is a huge organization, and I found it to be of some question or kind of shadiness of how big is too big to discriminate. Could you please answer that for me?
Sure. So there's several things in the question. So we'll separate let's do a quick background. For those of you who don't know, the Boy Scouts of America, the BSA, did a very extensive internal review that they just completed very recently. And this was a review by their equivalent of a board of trustees where they said, is it, as an organization, as a private organization, should we allow or recognize two things? A, parent leaders, scout leaders who may be openly gay, or Boy Scouts. And so, unfortunately, what they came back with was a very painful, divisive decision. You had some trustees who are leaving the BSA over this, and what the ruling was is it said, we're not saying you can't be in the Boy Scouts and be gay. What we're saying is if you happen to be in Scouts and you're in your whatever rank you are in the Scouts and you happen to let it be known that you're gay, you can no longer be in Scouts. So essentially what the Boy Scouts have now instituted is their own version of don't ask, don't tell. And that's very unfortunate because, again, anybody who happens to be a gay or lesbian, it's usually during those years, those teen years, where you're struggling the most and need the most support. As to the issue, though, and I'm going to separate this, as to the issue of not allowing women, they are the Boy Scouts. And so this is where I do think probably what's going to happen in the near future with the BSA is they are legally protected, just like the Girl Scouts don't allow men. I mean, they're the Girl Scouts, they got the Boy Scouts. But when the issue on the orientation issue, because there was such a divide on the trustees, and because of people who are involved in scouting, regardless of orientation, like myself, have said this is not okay. I think we're going to see very shortly the course correction by the BSA itself. But that was a decision that they made internally, not because a federal entity was impeding upon them. They are not a government entity. They are a private entity, much like any 501c3. So,
and you agree that the government should leave them alone?
I agree the government should leave them alone. I don't agree with the trustees' decision.
Okay.
Morally straight. I'm morally straight. My orientation, remember, I think, and we're now getting off on another topic, one's orientation does not define or determine if they're morally straight, because I know some heterosexual guys who are not morally straight. I know some polyamorous guys in Washington, D.C. who are stepping out on their wives every night of the week. That's not morally straight.
Amen.
Okay, please thank our debaters with a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Thanks for sticking it out. It is 10:06. The debate is officially over. Be sure to fill out your comment cards. Drop them in the boxes by the doors. Also, there's a literature table in the back from CRF. Have a good evening. Thanks for coming.